Hello there everyone, and welcome back to Weirdboys Studios for more Orky goodness. And we are going to be starting off this little video by looking at possibly my favourite unit amongst all the Orks. The Mek. The mechanics, as the Orks would like to say, with plenty of K's in there. So, an Ork Mek. You'd have thought it's relatively straightforward, right? These guys are basically the technical support of the Orky race. And whilst that's not untrue, it is far more interesting than that. Ork mechanics are Ork boys who, frankly, are some of the most cheerful, jovial and content craftsmen in the world, because they basically pick up a hammer, find anything they want, and make something ridiculous and awesome out of it. Doesn't matter what the scrap is, the Ork Mek will probably find a use for it. Ork technology develops in a very ramshackle and haphazardous way, so it means there's plenty of opportunities for things to go bang, boom, kazam, zap, and, well, it keeps the mechs on their toes, and it also means that the mechs that survive a long time are those that are actually really good at not only knowing when to get out of the way, but also are quick enough to react. So, starting at the bottom of the mech pole, you have what is known as a spanner. I briefly touched on this in the Ork Specialist video, where the spanner is basically a mech in training, I want to say. Although to say that mechs train is a little bit of a joke. Mechs kind of just try things and then just see if it works. Out of all other Orks, they have more of a disposition to actually be successful some of the time, but really, Orks don't so much train as they just try stuff, and if it works, it works. They don't question it, they don't think about it, they just try stuff, and then they get end results eventually. You know, it's kind of the if you throw enough typewriters at monkeys... No, wait, you don't throw typewriters at monkeys. Oh well. But basically the spanner is your first level mech, as it were. They will have a couple interesting guns, such as a custom Mega Blaster, basically a gun of the mech's own invention, which is a very interesting little weapon. Typically speaking, it fires balls of kinetic energy, or plasma, or lightning, or whatever the mech is feeling like at the time, really. The stage above the spanner is, well, the mech. This will be your standard mechanic who tends to be more into the building of bigger things. Walkers, trucks, bikes, buggies, gargants, you know, all that kind of awesome stuff. Now, as the mech gets better and better at their job, they tend to gather a bit of a following. Because, well, the Orks like to pay teeth to the mech who's more reliable than the rest. You know, the mech that tends to not give them random upgrades they didn't want, and also actually, you know, build decent tools, guns and vehicles. Decent by Ork standards, I want to stress this. In fact, a mech can become so popular that they can even rival the power of war bosses eventually, once they get to the big mech status. But a mech is sort of your mid-tier Ork mechanic, and they will basically be around sorting out the majority of the problems, so long as they're interesting. Unfortunately for them though, if they don't find them interesting, and the war boss decides it is important, then the war boss might come down to the mech shop and, well, let's just say he will encourage the mech to get on with his job. Well, at least he lose a limb or two, or possibly all of his limbs. The next stage up from a mech is the big mech. These are Orks who have truly mastered the strategy of stapling things together until it works, and are capable of truly awesome things, including the Mega Armor, which I talked about again in the previous video. And they often like to build suits of Mega Armor for themselves so they can try out some even more fancy doodads, including a force field technology that creates a protective bubble around both him and Orks around him, which is a very useful little weapon, or what is known as a teleport blaster. This thing basically, it shoots a beam at its victims and teleports them away in a haphazard fashion, shall we say. Basically, it just zaps you through the warp and you go screaming through it with no protection. And, well, you tend to pop out somewhere on the battlefield in various mushy pieces. Now, a big mech, instead of wearing mega armor, even though I personally feel the mega armor option always looks amazing, because not only can you have these funky guns, but you can give yourself power claws, kill saws, custom mega blasters, all that wonderful stuff. But if you decide that your orc mech is not bothering with that nonsense, he can instead take a frankly terrifying weapon known as the shock attack gun. This bizarre contraption works a little bit like the teleport blaster, except instead of zapping things and sending them through the warp, the big mech takes an unfortunate snotling, it gets sucked into the machine, and then the snotling is fired through the gun into the warp, goes screaming out through the other side, hitting terminal velocity, and, well, the snotling's dead. Let's just get this clear. The snotling ain't surviving this trip. And yeah, best case scenario for the snotling, his death causes an enormous kaboom because of all the kinetic energy built up from being fired through the warp, or he comes out of the warp, splashes into something and, well, basically covers them in all kinds of green gore and blood. For this reason, snotlings, the smaller variant of Gretchen, tend to run away from an orc mech when they start building these things because, well, the smart ones know what's coming. And it's not just, humans that this kind of gun can destroy. These snotlings are fired through the warp at such velocities that they can make vehicles, demons, terminators, buildings, everything just kind of go kaboom. Although it is a very randomized gun because, well, let's just say the technology is far, far, far from reliable. And orc mechs with significant enough status can lead their own wargs. It's far from uncommon for an orc mech to basically build up enough of a reputation that, well, they can basically do what they like. And because orc mechs are also great at using cyborg limbs, they're also great at creating cyborg appendages, orcs that have gone through the Painboy often get a little hand from their orc mech. Grafting onto them a new arm, or a new claw, new head even in the case of Gazgul, or severed limbs, or anything they like. And these orc mechs tend to lead wargs more in the pursuit of more stuff. They love scrap, they love looting things, and any technology they can get their hands on, they will reverse engineer and or, well, destroy it and make it as orky as possible. And now we go from a scientific, shall we say, orc with the tried and tested method of, if it didn't work, try again but hit it with a hammer harder, we go to a completely random and, well, frankly terrifying aspect of the orc army, the Weirdboys. Weirdboys are psychically powerful orcs who act as focal points for the energy of the warg. These odd boys, or weird boys as they're often known, resonate with the power of the orcs and basically make all kinds of hilarious things happen. The more orcs around them, the more powerful the weird boy gets. Unfortunately for the weird boy, this tends to be a bit of an issue because, as stated in the army book, even a contest between two rowdy orcs will cause waves of energy to pulse powerfully through a weird boy. And this can have wonderful effects like, lights flashing around his head, sparks flying from his eyes, power dribbling from his mouth, nose and ears. Unless the weird boy learns very quickly how to control this psychic power, they have a nasty habit of having their heads explode. Yeah. Orc weird boys have a pretty miserable life, I would say, out of all the orcs. And, your head exploding can be highly inconvenient, even for an orc. But the weird boys that are lucky enough to reach maturity and learn how to control these blasts of energy, they can be really terrifying and truly fantastic. Because of the weird boys' troubles with being too near too many of its kind, they tend to live in specialised huts that are far away from the main warg, and they tend to not be allowed to wander too close to the warg in case they explode. I've mentioned that some weird boys' head explode. well, depending on how big the warg is and, well, if the weird boy loses control, the explosion could be potentially nuclear in size. But when the orc warg gets going, when it starts charging and fighting, this is where the weird boy's powers tend to overflow. His eyes pop, his limbs flail, he thrashes around, he starts screaming and jumping up and down like a complete lunatic, and throws energy at everything left, right and centre, typically making things go kaboom. He can blast energies to pieces, stir up the orcs so that they become even more battle crazy. He can even teleport his allies closer to the enemy so that they can get at them quicker. Or he can roar in an aspect that has been believed by the orcs to be an aspect of Mork. A roar so terrifying that it could make enemies around them get a bit weak in the knees. As if an orc warg with a cackling madman at the front, with sparks flying out of his eyes, isn't unnerving enough. And finally, you have the warp head. Warp heads are weird boys who have survived long enough to become saturated with psychic power. These warp heads tend to plunge into the thickest fighting they can and blast the foe apart with green crackling energy. Orcs have severely addictive personalities when it comes to something they enjoy, even if it's something that lends towards their own self-destruction. And for warp heads, this is expressed by a desire to experience the overwhelming power of the warg. These energies often can flow over them in waves so powerful that it's almost like a drug. Many warp heads gather a following of like-minded orcs who are highly entertained by the destructive antics of the warp heads. You know, orcs do find it very funny to watch things explode around them in all kinds of pretty colours. And even though there is the occasional risk that the warp head might explode, orcs tend to find it's worth the risk to watch a space marine get stomped flat by a giant green foot manifesting from the sky, or Eldari melting into goo, hordes being catapulted into the air to land safely on the other side and be in charge range of an enemy they really want to get to grips with. Now, weird boys are strange for orc wargs. War bosses will tend to keep at least one or two of them around, because frankly it's very handy to have them around. Especially if you're fighting the Eldar, or Eldari as they're now known, from trying, as the orcs like to say, any funny stuff. And the Snakebite clan, the primitive clan of orcs, really like weird boys and warp heads, because they believe that they literally are speaking with the voice of Gork and Mork, although which one is speaking is always a matter hotly debated amongst the Snakebite tribes. Of course, these are orcs. When I say debated, I mean there's a punch-up over it, 9 times out of 10. As I said before, the Orc Weird Boy has some truly fantastic powers. I don't know how they're going to translate into the next edition, but I really hope they stay more or less the same, because the powers a Weird Boy has are frankly hilarious. These include, and are not limited to, Edbanger, a bolt of raw energy that erupts from the Weird Boy's forehead and rockets across the battlefield, and, well, tends to make whatever it hits explode in a shower of blood and gore. Warpath, the Weird Boy basically dispersing the warg energy back through the orcs and making them even more angry and crazy. Dud Jump, by far my favourite orc power, that basically means that you can manifest your orcs behind enemy lines, or 12 inches away from the enemy, which is all kinds of hilarious, especially if you have, say, a group of Meganobs, or 30 boys with sluggers and choppers. That's going to be really unpleasant for any poor sod who happens to be within charge distance. Fist of Gork, it sounds like what it is. A giant green fist appears from the sky and punches whatever is but down below it. This punch is strong enough to make Lehman Russ tanks buckle inwards and appear like tin cans. And yeah, anything that's human under that fist, oh boy, that's gonna smart. Duck Crunch, which is where Mork, or possibly Gork, or Gork or possibly Mork, no one's really sure, where basically a giant foot appears from the sky and crushes whatever's underneath it. Again, this is something that's not very pleasant for anyone involved. And the last one is the Roar of Mork, where the Weird Boy yells so loudly that he basically makes anyone who isn't an orc nearby kind of wet themselves. Although frankly, I think a Weird Boy and 30 boys appearing in my back lines would make me more scared than anything else. And now we go back to something slightly more scientific, although it is an orc, so make of that what you will. The Painboy. Why is he called a Painboy when he looks like a doctor? Well, orcs don't really believe in anaesthetic. Well, that's not strictly true. A sophisticatedly intelligent Painboy can develop various gases that can knock an orc out, but frankly, they prefer to just take a large mallet and club the orc over the head until they're unconscious. Because, why bother, you know? But if they're prepared to pay the extra teeth for the gas, well, it's all good for the Painboy. They're also known as docs. Yeah, and these guys are, frankly, I'm not a massive fan of doctors. They do a valuable service. I just don't like going to the doctor, really. But if my doctor was anything like a Painboy, I wouldn't go to him even if I was missing all my limbs, teeth, eyes, and hair. Although the hair isn't much longer for this world. Oh well. Anyway, Painboys tend to learn their craft through a mix of instinct, trial and error, and time-honed principles of orky whatnots, aka, if it doesn't work this time, try it again, but with more enthusiasm. They love to experiment, they love to tinker with the orc anatomy as much as they can, and, well, I'm not kidding when I say there are cases of orc Painboys who have, say, removed the brain from an orc, placed it inside of a squig, and put the squig's brain inside of the orc, just to see what would happen. And really, the irony is, not a whole lot changed. The only real difference was there was a very confused and angry squig, and a really angry, but far happier orc. And orcs don't go to a Painboy willingly, 9 times out of 10. Frankly, the orc Painboy often looks after his patients on the battlefield because he sees an unfortunate orc lying on the ground trying to crawl as quickly away from him as he can, with, no legs attached to the poor orc boy, and the Painboy takes it upon himself to try and help him, whether the orc wants it or not. This can be very distressing for the orc being operated on, but when all's said and done, a Painboy, more often than not, is capable of actually making an orc feel better. Severed limbs? Well, thanks to the orc anatomy, frankly, if you just shove the limb back on and staple it or sew it up or, hell, burn it back together, then the orc is probably going to be fine in a couple days. However, if the orc is losing a leg, and, well, frankly the leg's in too many pieces to make it worth the Painboy's time to reattach, he will call on help from his favourite friend, the Mek, who will help build a cybernetic limb for him, which he will assist in attaching. And, well, depending on the Painboy and the Mek, the limb might have other functions, which the Mek will more than likely not tell the Painboy or the orc because it's just funnier that way, including a rather unfortunate event involving a Mark II exploding leg. Yeah, that Painboy was feeling particularly malicious to that orc on that day, I imagine. But orc Painboys have also been known to, well, let me put it this way. Whilst a Painboy could help install a set of mechanical lungs to help you breathe easier, he might find it far more amusing to just attach another head to your shoulders and say, well, you can breathe better now because you now have 2 airways going in. And then that poor unfortunate orc has to argue with the other orc attached to his body for the rest of his life. Now you might be wondering why a Painboy doesn't often get, well, killed by the other orcs for all these insane experiments, and you frankly have a very worthwhile point, and often Painboys do get killed by their rather disgruntled clientele, which is one of the reasons why Painboys tend to be armed at all times, including oversized surgical implements, little saws, power claws, knives, and, well, always got a slugger on handy, but it's more that they stay alive because the war boss says so. If a war boss can see a Painboy 9 times out of 10 is making his orcs get back up again and get back in the fight, and the 10th orc has a head sewn onto his buttocks, then the war boss will just ignore the Painboy's eccentricities because, 9 out of 10 is fine. Who cares about that other orc boy? Gotta let the Painboy have a little bit of fun, haven't you? But the worst of these Painboys are often nicknamed by their orc brethren as bad docs. These are Painboys who tend to be ostracized from the orc camps Because frankly, if the Orc sees the Painboy, the bad doc nearby, he will try to shoot him on sight, because frankly, Painboys who get this reputation are so insane, so dangerous for the Orcs around them, that more often than not these Painboys will just club an Orc unconscious and just experiment on them for fun without consent, which is very, very bad form. Oh, and 9 times out of 10 these bad docs tend to remove all the teeth from the Orc as payment for his work, regardless of whether the Orc requested this doc work on him or not. Frankly, the only Orcs who tend to recruit bad docs are freebooters, because they are desperate enough to get the medical care, and well, there tend to be enough of them that the Painboy is happy to oblige, despite the considerable risk to their health. Now, Painboys and Meks often are accompanied by Gretchen, who are there to assist them in one way or another. Now, often than not, this can mean that the Gretchen gets killed in the process, but it tends to be worth it for the mech or the Painboy in question. And how do you use these 3 units? Well, frankly, they're very straightforward archetypes. The mech is your mechanical assistance. You can have him near your machine so he can try and repair them. You can have him with a force field to protect other Orcs around him. Or you can give him big guns, so it means he shoots stuff down. And he's a pretty damn decent combatant, especially if you give him mega armor and give him power claws, or kill saws. The Painboy is, well, he can take a bit of punishment, but he is there to make sure your Orcs get back up again and keep moving. The Gretchen there is to assist him and gives him a reroll, which is always very, very handy. The Weirdboy? He's kind of your stereotypical wizard, except that the Weirdboy is more of a stand back kind of guy. You don't want him too far away from your Orcs because you want him to get the best bonuses possible, because the more Orc units around him, the easier it is for him to cast his powers. But at the same time, you don't want him too close to the combat because, whilst he is quite a decent combatant, because he is an Orc at the end of the day, he's going to be a bit more squishy than the rest. And several of the models I've shown in this video, which I'm fairly sure you'll be able to tell, are my own Orcs that are led by my big mech. And frankly, this is why my Weirdboy has a mechanical skull, because I decided that the war boss of my army, the mech in the mega armor, decided that he was fed up of his Weirdboys exploding, and the next one he found, he basically cracked open his head and put a metal skull cap on, thinking to himself this would stop him from exploding. This has proven in my games to not always be true, but it is a hilarious idea in my head nonetheless. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this Orky video. Next one I think we're going to talk about vehicles, because I want to save the war boss for last. I want to thank all my wonderful subscribers and Patreon contributors. Without the Patrons, I cannot continue doing this stuff, so everyone who contributes on my Patreon page I sincerely appreciate. Thank you all to my old and new subscribers. I can't believe I've hit 90 today. That's frankly incredible. And I cannot thank you all enough for the support. I really enjoyed the conversation about the Space Wolf box, and I'm probably going to try and do more videos like that because, well, it's just shown to me that the community I've started to grow here is pretty good and open to conversation, which to me is awesome. Anyway, enough drivel. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend wherever you are. Otherwise, take care everyone.